You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
It's no different than what missionaries do today, trying to understand the culture so they can reach someone for Christ. How do you reach someone for Jesus in a culture where they think that treachery is a virtue? There is a tribe in Papua New Guinea that believes that. So how do you talk to them about Jesus and Judas when they think Judas is the good guy? They had to figure out a way to be able to do that. And they used a cultural thing called a peace child, and they understood that. And they said, well, Jesus is the peace child. Then they all came to Christ once they understood the cultural significance of that. So Paul's trying to do the same thing.
I come from an Asian background, so I'm sure you can imagine when Americans walk into my home how interested they are in the culture that I was raised in. The things my parents did were very different than my American friends' parents, but there wasn't a way that was better or worse. It was just different. Today, Pastor Ken says that in Paul's day, they tried to understand the culture they were in before teaching the gospel. You must know your context to share the gospel with others effectively. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of 1 Thessalonians chapter 3, as he begins his message, The Promise of Affliction.
So what we're going to be talking about here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 3 is, and this is hard to hear too, the promise of affliction for believers. It is not an if, it's a when. And it's one of those things that as followers of Jesus Christ, we have to kind of be ready for. Now, before getting too deep into things, let's back up a little bit and refamiliarize ourselves with where we are on the overall timeline with Paul and the team on this second missionary journey, how they came from Asia Minor into Greece, and it was all because of a dream that Paul had while they were in Troas. They left almost immediately based on that dream, and at that time we know the team consisted of Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Dr. Luke, who they picked up there in Troas. In fact, Dr. Luke writes in Acts 16, verse 11, so setting sail from Troas, we made a direct voyage to Samothrace, which is an island about a day's sail away from there, and the following day to Neapolis, which is another island, and from there to Philippi, which is the mainland, and that's where they stopped, is at Philippi, which is a leading city in the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony, and remained in the city some days. Paul was determined to begin his ministry in Macedonia proper after he had that dream. So they passed through Samothrace and Neapolis. They didn't do any ministry there. And they arrived in Philippi and then left the ship to go into town and minister. And they did so that very next Sabbath day. So we don't know if from the point that he had the dream to Sabbath was 1 week, 5 days. We know it was at least 4 days. So it was pretty quick. They began to do so that very next Sabbath day. They led a family there. They led Lydia and her family to Christ. And then they established her home as the base of operations for operations in Philippi. From the dream to that point, it's been less than 2 weeks. I mean, the Lord is really moving. In Acts, we see it was just the next day, the very next day, that the team ran into a fortune teller who began to follow them around. Here's the thing, Satan wasted no time sending an operative in to try and disrupt the mission. Now you have to understand the reason why this is going on is because of a very simple thing. Satan thought he was safe and had that territory all belonging to him with nobody else to bother him. But then Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead, changed everything. And the first group of soldiers to show up were Paul and Silas and Timothy and Dr. Luke. But this is something we need to remember today. Satan never wastes time attacking. Okay? He just doesn't. As we step out in faith to achieve whatever it is that the Spirit has led us to do on behalf of Jesus, we will be attacked. I have counseled many and continue to do so that step out and serve. And I've told them that as you step out and serve, you will experience things that get in the way. Your car battery will die, even though it's new. Been there. The car won't start. Yeah, that too. The parking lot is flooded. Twice. We've had that too. No one can park in it. And you have folks who have colds, but only on Sundays. And you're going like, what is this? Well, it's called Satan trying to stop the work. The reality of what's happening is Satan wants to delay, stop, or prevent you and me from doing anything on behalf of Jesus. He does. He wants to delay it. And if your ministry happens to be one that directly confronts the enemy and takes them from his camp, like Paul is doing, then there's a really big red X on the middle of your back. Are you working to free men and women, for example, from internet porn? Yep, you're going to get attacked. You will. I know people who are in that ministry, and they get attacked on a regular basis. Are you working with folks who have addictions? Yep, you're going to get attacked too. And if you're working with kids, oh yeah, you're going to get attacked. Satan thinks he's going to get a hold of those kids and keep them. Paul stepped into territory that Satan thought was his, and what Jesus did on the cross through the resurrection changed all that. But Satan thought he had a safe space from God based on what his understanding of Genesis 11 was, but everything changed. And it's no longer a safe space because Jesus promised in Matthew 16:18 at Caesarea Philippi that Peter and everyone else in the church was going to assault the gates of hell. In other words, directly attack those strongholds that people were going to hell from and then start pulling people out into the kingdom of heaven. So how long did this fortune teller follow Paul around? Several days. We don't know how long. It just says many days. And Paul, being the kind of guy he is, got annoyed. It says that in the text. Paul became annoyed and cast the demon out. And he did. He got annoyed. He cast the demon out of her and freed her, ending the fortune telling. But now all of a sudden it's an economic issue for those folks that she was a slave to because they were making money from that. And now it's kind of like, well, now what are we going to do? Well, let's persecute the guy who set the demon, that set her free. That's not unusual either, by the way. The moment following Jesus and being faithful to him impacts the bottom line of an unbeliever. That tends to be where the persecution suddenly ramps up. Why is it, for example, that we as a church have been unable to find a place to meet? Here's what we've been told. Well, it might impact the other businesses in the shopping center. It would bring business to the other businesses in the shopping center. But that's anyway. Well, parking's limited and we can't cut into their bottom line. Okay, but no businesses are located in that side of the shopping center at all. Yeah, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you run into. It's the economic impact, and folks will use that to try and prevent you from doing ministry. This economic impact situation that Paul and Silas ran into resulted in them being seized, charged, beaten, and drug off to jail. There was one little problem that the rulers were about to learn about, and that's Paul and Silas were both Roman citizens, and what just took place was not only illegal, but it was death penalty stuff. So they spent an eventful night in jail. There was an earthquake. People got saved. The jailer and his family got saved. And then the next morning, Paul confronted the rulers of the community. And when they found out that they were facing the death penalty, they wanted him gone because they didn't want anybody else to tell anyone what they had done. So they left. They ensured the little church there in Philippi was okay, and they did leave. So total time so far in Macedonia, 1 month. So 1 month, they've been beaten. So onwards to Thessalonica, and that takes about 3 to 5 days to get there, travel time. And then on the Sabbath, Paul and the team again began ministry, and once again, salvations began to take place. People are getting saved. Lives are being changed. Teaching is taking place. And the assault on the gates of hell continue. Right there in Demon Central, and they're being kicked out. Now, that would be encouraging to them based on the fact that they show up and they still have the scars and the beatings. So as we take a look at the map, you can see that they left Troas, they went to Samothrace, Neapolis, Philippi, and they're in Thessalonica, and they've been there in that side of the Greece for less than a month and a half. The problem in Thessalonica is the local synagogue. The leaders there became jealous of the team because they're teaching Christ and salvation without following the law. And of course, they're trying to spread Judaism with the law, and they're not having a lot of success with it. Something about circumcision, I'm sure. And here's Paul showing up saying, oh, you don't need to worry about that, And it says here in Acts 17, verses 5 to 9, the Jews were jealous, and they took some wicked men of the rabble, and they formed a mob. And they set the city in an uproar and attacked the house of Jason, seeking to bring them out to the crowd. And when they couldn't find them because they were busy ministering someplace, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city authorities, shouting, "These men have turned the world upside down and have come here also." And Jason has received them, and they're all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying that there's another king, Jesus. And these people in the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. So what did they do? When they had taken money as security from Jason and the rest, they let them go. 3 Sabbaths, a little more than 2 weeks, Paul and the team have to leave. A group of Jewish leaders and wicked men from the local market decide to visit Jason, and they kick off what is still going on today, which is protection rackets in the name of who knows. But it's a protection racket. They basically became mobsters and said, you pay us and we won't beat you. Extortion. And extortion is alive at that point. And guess what? This still continues today. It started as a protection racket in Thessalonica, run with governmental support. Remember, it said that. So you pay us money, we won't beat you, and the government will protect you. And Satan still uses that today as a means of preventing the gospel from being spread. For example, Islamic nations. If you are a Christian living in an Islamic nation, you will have to pay the jizya tax. And by the way, as a non-Muslim, you don't have equal access and protection of the courts, and you can't testify against a Muslim. Even if they kill your neighbor, you still can't testify against them because you're not a Muslim. Well, I thought Islam was a religion of peace, and I've heard that before. Here's the sneaky news. It's not, okay? If you do an analysis of the Quran, the Hadiths, their historical past, and the interpretation today, you'll find out that Muslim fundamentalists and ISIS, it's not an aberration. They're just carrying out what Islam teaches. They're just simply following what it says. This means that the idea of religious toleration in their culture, even though they talk about it, is not an idea that's embraced. Try and build a church in Saudi Arabia. Can't. In fact, they'll push you from a high place if you do. They have no high places in Saudi Arabia, so they take a helicopter up to 10,000 feet, push you out. So they're engaging in a similar protection scheme, okay? And here's how they put it together. They felt that the infidelity of people of the book, that's Christians, Jews, folks who are non-followers of Muhammad and Allah, that we're not guilty of absolute denial, but only a partial perversion of the truth, and only part of the punishment for disbelief is due, so it's imposed in the shape of a tribute or a poll or capitation tax, the jizya tax, which, and here's the key, when you pay that, you secure protection for your property and personal freedom and religious toleration from the Muslim government. And you talk to brothers and sisters in Pakistan and they tell you, none of that exists for real. Our brothers and sisters in Pakistan are being routinely beaten, arrested, and killed, and they're saying, well, religious toleration doesn't exist. Can we file with the police? Yeah, but they ignore it because they don't have standing. They're not Muslims. And can groups come in and storm your church and take everything out and burn it to the ground with no repercussions? Yep, absolutely, and it happens all the time. So here we have Paul and the team. They've been in Macedonia for less than 2 months, and now they have to leave Thessalonica, and they're going to Berea. But the protection racket's good business, they found out, and it still is. That's why it's going on today. And the jealousy of the Jewish leadership was strong, so they show up in Berea, and once again, Paul and the team have to leave. And this time they split up. Paul and Timothy take a ship, and they go to Athens, and the rest follow later by land. So in Athens, Paul decides to send Timothy back. Okay, you've just sailed all the way to Athens, and now he says, I want you to go all the way back to Thessalonica. And what did Paul do? Well, he does what he always does. But there's no synagogue in Athens. But there is an Acropolis, and there are some temples. So he goes up there. He goes to Mars Hill, and he starts arguing with some of the philosophers who go up there. It's a city of intellectuals. And later he goes to Corinth. By the way, there was no church plant in Athens that we know of. There were some who were saved, but he did not plant a church. Then he goes on to Corinth, and in Corinth he teams up with Jewish believers who had been kicked out of Rome, and they start a mission to reach the people of Corinth for the Lord. And while in Corinth, the rest of the team show up. Timothy and the rest of the team. And Paul has a vision from the Lord which says, hey, you're going to be here for a while. It's okay. We're not going to chase you out of here too. So he was there for 1.5 years. And this brings us to 1 Thessalonians 3. Now, Timothy's mission is referenced by Paul and the team, so it was important for us to kind of know what's going on as this mission's taking place. And this letter, Thessalonian letter, is due to Timothy returning to them with good news about the church. Verse 1, therefore, when we could no longer endure it, we thought it best to be left behind alone at Athens. So he sends Timothy away. And we sent Timothy, our brother, and God's fellow worker in the gospel of Christ, to strengthen and encourage you for the benefit of your faith, so that no one would be disturbed by these afflictions. For you yourselves know that we have been destined for this. For even when we were with you, we kept telling you in advance that we were going to suffer affliction. And so it happened, as you know. For this reason, when I could no longer endure it, I also sent to find out about your faith, for fear that the tempter might have tempted you and our labor would have been for nothing. So for Paul, sending Timothy back to Thessalonica was not an easy thing. I mean, this is a serious sacrifice for him, to be left alone in Athens to do ministry. He uses a verb, katelepen, which doesn't mean just remain behind, but it means there's an emotional sense that he's letting a piece of himself go when he lets him leave. There's an emotional connection there. And Paul needs to have that kind of connection. I love the way that Dr. Witherington puts it. He says, Paul's a social animal. He's not reluctant to show his feelings. So here's the thing. If you've ever done any international travel by yourself, it can be a little daunting. You go someplace new, and it's a new culture, and it's a new country. When I was in the Air Force, we thought it was important, and when we had small groups arriving, they'd arrive by commercial flight. And we always wanted to be at the airport to meet them, no matter what time of day it was, because we knew what it would be like when you got off the plane. So you're in a group of 4, you've flown out of Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska, where it's 80 degrees, and you've changed planes in Germany, and now 20 hours after you left, you're landing in Kuwait City. The very first thing you see after you clear customs is a line of 200 or 300 men, all waiting for flights, for people to clear customs. They're all dressed in gutras and dishdash, which is the white traditional attire, with their worry beads. And if you're walking out and you're expecting to see a normal airport setting, that's not a normal airport setting. That's a little different. Nobody's wearing Western attire, and you're just kind of like, whoa. I actually had one kid tell me, I'm not in Kansas anymore. No, you're not. But we were there right in the middle of it all to save them. We wanted to make sure that they were okay. And the thing is if you're with others that you can lean on, that's why we were there, then it's not as daunting as it would be otherwise. And then we had to prepare them for the next thing. Yes, it's 11 o'clock at night. It's still 105 outside, so I hope you're ready for that. So, they'd flown from a nice place to the desert. If you're in a place like Athens in the 1st century AD, it's a culture of idolatry. Paul had seen idolatry before, but never like this. There's no synagogue. There is no Christian or Jewish anything going on in the town. And this is all new to him. He'd read about it. He'd studied. He had the equivalent of a PhD in Greek philosophy, but he still was trying to go man, I've never been in this. Now, he may have enjoyed arguing over ideas, but the Stoics and the Epicureans, the ones he talks to, they love to argue just because they could argue. They were intellectuals. That's what they do. Still do today. He eventually engaged with them in his sermon on Mars Hill, but even then he changes things up a bit, and he actually had to rely a little bit on Greek philosophers as part of his message. He does not quote the Old Testament explicitly, and he actually quotes one of the philosophers, too. So a lot of people think, well, he was just trying to do what he could do to get people saved. Yeah, that's what you do. He's a missionary. He's trying to study the culture and figure out what he has to do to reach folks for Christ in that culture. It's no different than what missionaries do today, trying to understand the culture so they can reach someone for Christ. How do you reach someone for Jesus in a culture where they think that treachery is a virtue? There is a tribe in Papua New Guinea that believes that. So how do you talk to them about Jesus and Judas when they think Judas is the good guy? They had to figure out a way to be able to do that. And they used a cultural thing called a peace child, and they understood that. They said, well, Jesus is the peace child. Then they all came to Christ once they understood the cultural significance of that. So Paul's trying to do the same thing. We should too. If you're talking to somebody and they've never heard about Jesus before, you've got to start from ground zero. And, that's coming to become more common these days. Paul had a difficult time in Athens. He didn't see a lot of people saved. It was tough. I mean, it's hard to talk to intellectuals, people who think they know everything. Just ask them, they'll tell you. And it's harder to talk to people who are basking in, with what I've done. Yeah, okay, fine, great, I'm glad. And it's hard for us to do that too. But Paul did reach a few of them for Jesus. I mean, and the thing is, our results might be just as meager as his. We only read about 2 or 3 people in the text of the scriptures who come to Christ. Timothy's not with him. Paul's by himself. And he's still concerned about that church back in Thessalonica. So who's Timothy, by the way? Paul uses a term frequently, and he uses it of Timothy. Now, other than the recipient of 2 letters, we know that Timothy received 2 letters from Paul saying, here's how you do church, here's how you be a pastor. He is also a dear and valuable brother and fellow worker in the service of Christ. He's called God's fellow worker in the gospel of Christ here. And the word that's used, we actually get the word synergy from. It's synergon is the word. And it simply means fellow worker, but Paul uses the designation synergos or synergon for a number of people who are not just helping him, but who work with him and they're part of a team. They're working under his direction. When he uses these terms, he raises a claim for himself and his helpers that they're part of sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. They're sharing the burden with him of the ministry, and they're sharing in God's own work with the toil and the labor, just as it says in Isaiah 43:24. So they're God's servants and God's workers, and they can claim the obedience of the community, but they don't. They don't do that. And they're not lords of the community, but they're helpers of its joy. And we see that over and over and over again. I mean, it's like whenever you have someone who's been working in the mission field comes to visit us here in the States, and they tell us what the Lord's doing there, you get joy over the fact that they're seeing people come to Christ. But why the focus on Timothy? Well, the people in Thessalonica know him. And by the way, he's going to be carrying this letter back with him. He may not know that yet, but he's going to be taking the letter back with him. And it's a validation of the ministry to them that he's already done in the past and will do in the future. I mean, he's kind of the guy who's going to be the go-to, and he's going to be working as a pastor again in Thessalonica. And by the way, this is also the beginning of something that Paul had to start doing because he couldn't go back in person. He started writing letters. I'm so glad he started writing letters. We have them. Letters that would be read and reread and then copied and sent to other churches. That's what began to happen. In fact, he actually talks about it later in this book. It winds up being a written text to be read to others repeatedly as part of teaching and preaching. And that's what happened. And we're still doing it today, by the way. We're reading his letter and trying to understand what he's saying even today. Paul will later refer to this in 1 Thessalonians 5:27. It became a practice then. In fact, the people in Thessalonica collected all the letters, and they are the ones who first put together the codex of all Paul's epistles. The intent of Timothy being sent was to strengthen and encourage those in the church, and more specifically those being persecuted and suffering as a result of what was going on. And he's concerned about their faith. I would be too. So Timothy's purpose is to come alongside those suffering and encourage them. Verse 2, we sent Timothy, our brother and God's fellow worker in the gospel of Christ, and here's the reason why, to strengthen and encourage you for the benefit of your faith, so that no one would be disturbed by these afflictions. You're being persecuted, you're being hurt, you're being afflicted. He's here to encourage you.
You're listening to Pastor Ken Brown here on the Unsafe Bible. Pastor Ken is coming to you from Calvary Chapel, Martin County in Hobe Sound, Florida. Today's message is part of a series Pastor Ken is leading us through on the book of 1 Thessalonians. The Apostle Paul reminds us in this book that the way of Jesus goes against the logic of this world, and people will push back against the church because of that contradiction. But Paul isn't worried about the Thessalonian church's faithfulness, because he's already seen them withstand persecution. At the end of this book, He reminds his readers to allow God's presence to permeate into every corner of their lives so that they can stand strong and tall against the enemy's attacks. We're glad you took the time today to join us for this teaching from Pastor Ken. We know that these words you've just heard are impactful for every believer, no matter where you are in life. If you'd like to hear more from Pastor Ken's study on 1 Thessalonians or on any other part of the Bible, you can visit us online at theunsafebible.com and click on the Media tab to access our sermon archive. If you're near Hobe Sound, Florida, we'd also like to invite you to join us for our in-person gatherings. While the convenience of hearing God's Word over the radio waves is valuable, it cannot replace the fellowship that comes with in-person worship. Our website will have all the details you need to make your visiting plan. Pastor Ken will be back soon to continue sharing from God's Word. So join us next time on The Unsafe Bible.